Most people think about their meals one at a time. You eat breakfast, that's done. You eat lunch, that's done. You eat dinner, that's done. Each meal feels like its own separate event. A thing that happens, gets processed, and ends, but that is not how your metabolism works. What you eat at lunch is actively shaping what your blood sugar does at dinner. Not in a vague, indirect way, in a direct, measurable, biological way that researchers have been studying for over 4 decades. This phenomenon has a name. Scientists call it the second meal effect. And once you understand it, you will never look at your midday meal the same way again. Today, I want to walk you through what the second meal effect is, why it happens, and most importantly, exactly which foods at lunch produce the most powerful glucose stabilizing effect at your next meal. With practical, specific guidance you can apply starting today. This is one of the most underappreciated discoveries in metabolic nutrition research. It is not widely discussed in mainstream health conversations, but the science behind it is solid, the mechanisms are well understood, and the practical implications are real. Let's start at the beginning. What is the second meal effect? In the 1980s, Canadian researcher named David Jenkins, the same scientist who developed the concept of the glycemic index, made an observation that changed how nutritional scientists thought about meal timing and blood sugar. He noticed that what people ate at breakfast appeared to influence their blood sugar response to lunch, not just in a general eat healthy all day kind of way, but in a specific, reproducible, dose-dependent way. The glucose response after the second meal was measurably lower when certain foods were eaten at the first meal, and this effect persisted for hours after the first meal had been fully digested. Jenkins called this the second meal effect, the idea that meal 1 creates conditions that change how the body responds to meal 2. Since then, dozens of studies have confirmed and expanded this finding. We now know that the effect works across multiple meal pairs, breakfast affecting lunch, and importantly for our purposes today, lunch affecting dinner. And we understand at least partially why it happens. The answer lies in something you've heard me mention before, the gut and its bacteria. Here's how the mechanism works. Certain foods, particularly those rich in a specific type of fiber called fermentable fiber or prebiotic fiber, are not digested in the small intestine the way most foods are. They pass through largely intact and arrive in the large intestine, where they become food for the trillions of bacteria that live there. When those bacteria feed on this fiber, they produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids. The 3 most important ones are called acetate, propionate, and butyrate. These are small molecules that your gut bacteria manufacture by fermenting the fiber you've fed them. And here is where the connection to blood sugar becomes remarkable. These short-chain fatty acids do not stay in the gut. They enter the bloodstream, they travel to the liver, the muscles, and various tissues throughout the body. And once there, they do several things that directly improve how your body handles glucose. They slow the rate at which the stomach empties food into the small intestine. This means glucose from your next meal enters the bloodstream more gradually. The spike is blunted. They stimulate the release of hormones in the gut, particularly a hormone called GLP-1, which you may have heard of because it's the mechanism targeted by certain newer diabetes medications. GLP-1 tells the pancreas to release insulin in a more calibrated way, and it tells the brain to reduce hunger. The short-chain fatty acids your gut bacteria produce from lunch fiber are in effect doing a version of what those medications do naturally through food. They improve insulin sensitivity in the liver and muscle tissue. They reduce the liver's tendency to overproduce glucose. And they appear to reduce low-grade inflammation throughout the body, which, as we've discussed before, is one of the underlying drivers of insulin resistance. All of this happens because of what you ate at lunch, and it persists for hours. The short-chain fatty acids produced from a fiber-rich lunch are still circulating, still active when you sit down for dinner. Your gut bacteria are still fermenting. The GLP-1 effect is still present. The insulin sensitivity improvement is still in place. This is why your dinner glucose response is lower when your lunch was rich in the right kind of fiber. The first meal is not just feeding you, it is programming your metabolism for the next several hours. Now let me make this practical, because understanding the mechanism matters, but knowing exactly what to eat matters more. The foods that produce the strongest second meal effect are those richest in fermentable prebiotic fiber. Let me take you through the most powerful categories. The first and most important category is legumes. Lentils, chickpeas, black beans, kidney beans, cannellini beans, split peas. These are the champions of the second meal effect research. Multiple studies have specifically examined legumes eaten at lunch and their effect on post-dinner glucose, and the results are consistently impressive. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that eating lentils at lunch reduced the blood sugar spike after dinner by approximately 20% compared to eating the same caloric amount of white bread at lunch. Another study found that chickpeas eaten at one meal reduced the glycemic response at the following meal, and that this effect was more pronounced in people with higher insulin resistance, meaning the people who need it most benefit the most. Why legumes specifically? Because they contain multiple types of fermentable fiber simultaneously. They contain resistant starch, starch that resists digestion in the small intestine and arrives intact in the large intestine for bacterial fermentation. They contain a type of soluble fiber that forms a viscous gel in the gut, slowing gastric emptying significantly. And they contain oligosaccharides, complex carbohydrates that are essentially pure fuel for beneficial gut bacteria. The combination produces a large and sustained production of short-chain fatty acids. The effect on the next meal is powerful and consistent. How to use them at lunch: a lentil soup, a chickpea salad, black beans mixed with vegetables in a bowl, hummus, which is made from chickpeas as a side with your lunch, alongside raw vegetables. Even a small portion of legumes alongside another food is enough to trigger a meaningful second meal effect. You don't need a large quantity. Research suggests that as little as 1/3 of a cup of cooked lentils or chickpeas at lunch can produce a measurable effect at dinner. The second category is barley. Barley is the whole grain with the strongest evidence for the second meal effect. And the reason is very specific. Barley is exceptionally high in a type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan. You may have heard of beta-glucan in relation to oats. Oats also contain it, and it is part of why oats have a reputation for being heart healthy. But barley contains roughly 2 to 3 times as much beta-glucan as oats. Beta-glucan forms an extraordinarily thick, viscous gel in the digestive tract. This gel slows gastric emptying dramatically. It acts as a physical buffer between food and the intestinal lining, reducing how fast nutrients, including glucose, are absorbed. And it is highly fermentable, arriving in the large intestine to feed gut bacteria and produce short-chain fatty acids. A landmark study conducted in Sweden found that eating barley at lunch reduced blood sugar after dinner by up to 23% compared to white wheat bread. Post-dinner insulin levels were also significantly lower, meaning the pancreas had to work considerably less hard. The researchers measured the effect persisting for more than 10 hours after the barley was eaten. 10 hours, one lunch meal shaping the glucose response a full 10 hours later. How to use barley at lunch. Barley soup is one of the most traditional and delicious preparations. It absorbs flavors from broth, vegetables, and herbs beautifully. Pearl barley can be cooked and used as a base for grain bowls, the way you might use rice. It can be added to stews, to stuffed peppers, or to salads. It has a pleasant, slightly nutty flavor and a satisfying, chewy texture. It takes longer to cook than white rice, but you can cook a large batch at the beginning of the week and use it throughout. It stores well in the refrigerator for 4 to 5 days. The third category is whole oats, specifically rolled oats prepared with intact structure, not instant. We've discussed oats before in terms of breakfast, but their second meal effect properties make them worth revisiting for lunch as well. A bowl of properly prepared rolled oats at lunch, perhaps with a handful of nuts and berries, or savory oats with vegetables and an egg, provides beta-glucan in meaningful quantities and triggers gut fermentation that will still be influencing your dinner glucose response hours later. Savory oats at lunch may sound unusual, but they are common in several food traditions and genuinely satisfying. Cooked rolled oats with sautéed spinach, a poached egg, and a drizzle of olive oil is a filling, nutritious, and metabolically powerful midday meal. The fourth category is vegetables with high fermentable fiber content. Not all vegetables are equal in their fermentable fiber content. Some are predominantly water and non-fermentable fiber. Others are rich in the prebiotic compounds that feed gut bacteria most effectively. The standouts for second meal effect purposes include garlic and onions, which are rich in inulin and fructooligosaccharides, prebiotic fibers that are among the most potent drivers of short-chain fatty acid production. Leeks fall into the same category. Jerusalem artichokes, sometimes called sunchokes, have the highest inulin content of almost any food. They are not common on every plate, but they are worth knowing about and increasingly available at farmers markets and specialty stores. Asparagus is another excellent source of prebiotic fiber, and it is far more accessible than Jerusalem artichokes. Roasted asparagus with olive oil and garlic at lunch is both delicious and a powerful combination of fermentable fiber sources. Cooked and cooled potatoes and rice deserve a special mention. Here is something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. When you cook a starchy food like potato or rice and then let it cool in the refrigerator overnight, the starch undergoes a structural change called retrogradation. The starch crystallizes into a form called resistant starch type 3, resistant starch that cannot be broken down by your digestive enzymes and arrives intact in the large intestine for bacterial fermentation. A potato eaten hot and fresh has a glycemic index of around 85. That same potato, cooked, chilled overnight, and eaten cold or reheated gently, has a glycemic index that drops to approximately 25 to 35 depending on the study. This is not a marginal difference. This is a fundamental change in how the food behaves in your body. Cold potato salad, dressed with olive oil, mustard, and herbs, is actually a metabolically superior choice to hot mashed potatoes. Cold rice eaten in a rice salad behaves very differently from the same rice eaten freshly cooked and hot. And because these resistant starches reach the large intestine intact, they are fermented by gut bacteria and produce short-chain fatty acids, meaning they contribute to the second meal effect and will blunt your dinner glucose response. This changes how you can think about leftovers. Cooking rice and potato-based dishes the night before and eating them chilled or at room temperature the following day at lunch is not just convenient, it is metabolically advantageous. Now let me tell you about Robert. You may remember Robert from an earlier video. 68 years old, retired school principal. He was the one whose morning glucose improved significantly when we changed his breakfast. Several months after that success, Robert came back with a new pattern that was puzzling him. His morning numbers were excellent now. His blood sugar through the morning was stable, but his post-dinner readings in the early evening were consistently higher than he wanted them to be. Even when he was careful about what he ate at dinner, he was doing everything right at dinner. Smaller portions, vegetables, a lean protein, no white rice or bread, and yet the number 2 hours after dinner was still climbing into ranges that concerned both of us. I asked him about lunch. His lunch was modest and what he considered sensible. A turkey sandwich on whole wheat bread, sometimes a small bag of pretzels, a piece of fruit, no legumes, no barley, no fermentable fiber of any significance. His gut bacteria were receiving almost nothing to ferment at midday. No short-chain fatty acids were being produced. No GLP-1 was being stimulated. No insulin sensitivity improvement was being carried into the evening. His dinner, no matter how careful he was about it, was starting from scratch. Without the preparation that a fiber-rich lunch would have provided, we changed his lunch, not dramatically, we kept it practical. The sandwich stayed, but we replaced the whole wheat bread with a dense rye bread and added a side of lentil soup, a small cup, prepared simply with garlic, onion, and broth. 3 times a week, we swapped the sandwich entirely for a chickpea and vegetable bowl with olive oil and herbs. 6 weeks later, his post-dinner readings had dropped by an average of 22 points. Same dinner, same evening routine, different lunch. He called me, genuinely excited. He said, "My dinner didn't change at all. My lunch changed my dinner." That is the second meal effect. That is the science working exactly as predicted. Let me now give you a clear, practical framework for building a second meal effect lunch. The goal is simple: include at least one significant source of fermentable fiber at every lunch. Not a large amount, a meaningful amount. Here are some examples of what that looks like. A cup of lentil soup alongside whatever else you are eating. Lentils are perhaps the easiest legume to prepare. They cook in 20 minutes without soaking, they absorb flavors easily, and they can be made in large batches and eaten throughout the week. A chickpea salad with olive oil, lemon, cucumber, and tomato. Quick to assemble, filling, and rich in the fermentable fiber that drives the second meal effect. A barley grain bowl with roasted vegetables and a drizzle of tahini or olive oil. Cold potato salad made with olive oil and herbs prepared the night before so the resistant starch has formed. A hearty vegetable soup with beans or lentils added to the base. Hummus with raw vegetables, carrots, celery, cucumber as a side component of your lunch. Any of these, eaten consistently at lunch, will be actively improving your dinner glucose response. The bacteria are fed, the short-chain fatty acids are produced, the GLP-1 effect is in place, the insulin sensitivity is improved. Your dinner happens in a different metabolic environment than it would have without that lunch. The compound effect of doing this consistently 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year is substantial. This is not a dramatic intervention. It is a quiet, consistent daily input that accumulates over months into a meaningfully different metabolic baseline. Before I close, the familiar reminder: if you are managing diabetes with medication, please do not make significant changes to your diet without discussing them with your doctor. When these interventions work, and they do work, your blood sugar management improves. Your medication may need adjustment. That is a wonderful problem, but it should be handled with medical supervision. If someone you know is working hard to manage their blood sugar after dinner, if they are careful at dinner but their numbers are still not where they want them, if nobody has ever told them that their lunch is shaping their dinner, please share this video with them. The second meal effect is not a secret that needs to stay one. Next week, we are going to talk about something that is quietly making blood sugar management harder for millions of people who don't even realize it is connected. The relationship between poor sleep and insulin resistance. How a bad night of sleep raises your glucose the next day. Why you crave carbohydrates and sugar after poor sleep, and why that is your biology speaking, not your willpower failing. And specific things you can do starting tonight. It connects directly to everything we have discussed in this series. Make sure you don't miss it, subscribe, hit the bell. I'll see you next week. I'm Dr. Sterling. Take good care of yourself at lunch today. It matters more than you knew.